Good morning. Good morning. It is an absolute honor to be here with you at this inaugural gathering. And I want to thank the President, Mike Griffin, for his welcome, his gracious welcome this morning. For Bobby, I want to thank him for that introduction, but moreover, our nation and its efforts, particularly related to space technology, have been advanced by his leadership, and I want to thank him for his commitment, both to educating the next generation of scientists and engineers at Georgia Tech, but also his willingness to be and to serve in a very important public role that initiated the space technology effort under the last few years. Now, you're going to hear this morning from a number of people who are at the leading edge of our nation's efforts in terms of innovation. Arthi Provocateur is the head of DARPA, and you're going to hear from Mike Gazarik, who is the space technologist at NASA. And you're going to hear a lot about what's actually going on. I want to start at a place where we put this in context, however. The World Economic Forum said that for our nation, this economy, the United States economy, is an innovation-driven economy. And what is meant by that, I think, is clear that it is not just based on our natural resources or our population, but that at the heart, at the shaping impulse of the American economy is built around innovation. And innovation requires an ecosystem that is represented so very well in this industry. In fact, aerospace is our greatest participant in terms of our exports. You look at the last couple of years in which the numbers are available, we went from $118 billion in aerospace to $220 billion. Over 500,000 Americans are working today in the aerospace industry. You should give yourselves a round of applause for the contribution that this industry has made and continues to make to position our nation as a global leader. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Now, President John F. Kennedy appeared at Rice University in the early 1960s, and he said that our nation was going to land a man on the moon and bring him back to Earth safely. That effort launched NASA. It launched our country as the premier nation in the world in terms of space exploration. The truth is that our absolute lead in this industry is now a relative lead. That is that we have competition that has emerged, and we welcome that competition. But we've seen just in the last few months, whether it's China or South Korea, India, others who are fully capable of participating in the exploration of space. Now, NASA is still at the very cutting edge, but this administration has taken the note that we need to go about this in a much more aggressive way in terms of space exploration, in terms of seeking to go where we have not yet traveled, whether to Mars or to an asteroid, as a way of stretching out the technology envelope, but much more in terms of keeping the United States positioned as a world leader in this regard. The advent of the commercial crew and the commercial cargo program has ushered in a an exciting opportunity for the partnership with private enterprise. I walked on the plant floor at SpaceX and saw as they were putting together rocket ships that would travel to the space station, and we just saw orbital successful launch and docking with the International Space Ship. I support the continuation of the International Space Station up through 2024, and I hope that our international partners will join with us in this effort. But I want to spend a few minutes and talk not about space, but how it relates every day to the lives of people, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. This morning, you'll see a report from the Federal Aviation Administration that we have had the safest year ever in terms of airplane safety, and the loss of both airplanes and lives has been at the lowest level ever in history. And I want to draw a line directly from that data point to our efforts at NASA, because it is from the Apollo program that the fly-by-wire efforts that now guide and produce the ability, not just for our airplanes, but for cars, for even our submarines, to be able to be guided safely and to avoid accidents. This is a direct result of the investments that we have made in space exploration, and there's so many more that we could recount. But I think that whether it is when our teenagers are listening to music, or rather those who are deaf are able to hear through implanted devices, we could run through the whole range. But let me just tell you a personal example. I had an unfortunate circumstance when an immediate member of my family had to have an MRI just a few days ago. And there are all kinds of circumstances, global satellite positioning, whether we are trying to find our way to this convention site, or whether we're trying to find our golf ball out on a golf course somewhere, that all of this, through the work of critical agencies and innovation, NASA, DARPA, the National Science Foundation. It's been mentioned that I visited a lot of our national labs, and I've been, whether it's at Los Alamos or Sandia, I've seen the work at our nuclear weapons enterprise labs. And if we're committed to nuclear non-proliferation, and if nuclear weapons are one of our greatest threats to our civilization, this work at these labs are critically important. But I've also seen the work at the Aragon lab in terms of batteries, and I could go through the laundry list of the great work that's taking place at our national labs, but needless to say, they represent part of the ecosystem that's critical to our country being able to position itself for continued leadership and cooperation with other nations around the world. So when we see the hope that is evident in innovation in terms of dealing with some of the grand challenges in the world, Abundance, which is a great book that outlines how through technology and innovation we can truly have an impact on all of humankind, and we see it every single day, that in aerospace, not only is it benefited in terms of safety, but efficiency. We know through traveling through our airports that there's a lot more volume, but we've been able to manage that efficiently because of innovation. So I think that for the federal perspective, we need to continue to make investments. And it's interesting because in this town, when we say investments, some people say, well, you know, we just want to continue to spend taxpayers' money. Well, the fact of the matter is that investments in science and innovation are at the core of what has positioned our nation up until this moment. And we have to make these investments. When we debate a $7 billion budget for the National Science Foundation and ignore a small country like Singapore investing equal sums in their National Science Foundation, we sell our own country short. DARPA, in its budget, which is playing a critical role, and I want to thank Arthi for the work that they're doing. It just had a great robotics competition, but I'm especially appreciative of the work they're doing on the BRAIN initiative. And their budget is just a small fraction, some $3 billion. But it is, I think, renowned throughout all of industry that DARPA is at the very cutting edge of innovation in a whole range of activities. So we need to continue to argue that these investments are important. Our national labs, which a lot of Americans are not going to have a chance to be able to see up front and close. But when I was on the floor of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, when the Mars rover landed safely and intact on Mars after an 8.5-month travel to Mars, I think that throughout our country, there was an extraordinary appreciation for the ability that we have to be able to take on difficult tasks. Now, President Obama said that when we're looking to make cuts, as if we were trying to lighten the load on an airplane, the idea that the first thing you want to toss out is the engine is not the best approach. The engine of our economy is innovation. So we should not be making reckless cuts to R&D, basic scientific research that the federal government's engaged in which the private sector has benefited from, but the private sector is not in a position to take on research or to take on the very cutting edge of this research in which the idea of a profit or a market is not yet established. But this is an area where the government has played the role and needs to continue to play this role. And so when we think about the challenges that we face, as you gather here, your industry has contributed so mightily to our economy. And you're at the very, you're really at the point of the spear in terms of our efforts to increase our exports and to also build an economy in which the ability to create markets and to access these markets are available safely and efficiently. So I want to thank you for what you have done and tell you that the reward for good work is more work, that there is still so much more for us to do. I went out to Seattle, to Everett, to look at the work that was being done by Boeing, building the Dreamliner. And you see that here's a plane in which the composite materials that are involved would not exist without federal investment in science and new materials. But you see tens of thousands of people working. You see planes that orders are backlogged for almost a decade. There's work to be done, not just in terms of building those new planes, but in thinking anew about our entire efforts. Pratt Whitney, I visited their engine plant out in East Hartford and saw this pure power engine. And at the heart of it, a young woman who, I think decades ago, if we'd have thought about a young woman being a jet engine engineer, some might have thought that that was a notion too far into the future. But we see that through diversifying those who are able to contribute and also thinking anew about how we tackle old challenges and newer challenges, that we can make a tremendous difference. So I want to thank you for what you have done, encourage you to continue to explore new horizons. Appreciate the moment in which, on the day that you arrive here in the Washington area, that the FAA would say that you have the safest record in history of flight. And we can also think about the work that's in front of us in terms of truly innovating in terms of not just aerospace, but we know that the spinoffs from the aerospace, and there have been so many that we could walk through, but the time won't allow for me to do that and for you to hear from the panelists. But safe to say that so much of what we enjoy every day in terms of communications and in terms of our day-to-day lives have direct connections to aerospace scientific and technological advancements. So I want to thank you on behalf of a nation that is positioned not just to lead the world today, but because of your work and because of what you will do as we go forward, the United States is positioned to continue to lead this world. And there's a lot of positions that one could assume, but number one is always a great place, because the view from the top is a view that has an appreciation that can lend itself to lift other nations as we go forward. Thank you very much, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, so we have time for a few questions, and I was remiss in not stating earlier that the format for this morning's session is there are folks walking around with little cards, little index cards, and if you have a question either for the congressman or for the panelists in the coming moments, just jot it down on one of these index cards, and there'll be folks that'll run them up here to me, and I'll read the questions for folks. So you should be looking for these cards if you have a question. I have one that was already handed to me for the congressman, sir. The question is, what's in your view, what's the forecast for enhanced R&D funding in today's budget environment with significant deficits?
In 1983, a guy who graduated from the best high school in the world, Overbrook, Guy in Beaufort, was on the shuttle mission. It inspired me from that moment forward to be interested in these matters. I think that what we need to do is have our country inspired by the work that's being done. And our agencies like DARPA and NASA, NIST, the national labs, we need much more exposure in order to have the public more appreciate this. But in the meantime, those of us who are making policy have to be mature enough not to cut off our nose to spite our face. So I think that President Obama's point about lightening the load on our airplane, you don't want to get rid of vital systems or the engines, for instance. So the country's entire economic well-being is tied to innovation, and that's tied to, at the origins of federal research. So it has dropped as a percentage of our GDP, it's dropped as a percentage of our federal budget. I think that you're going to see, as we go forward in the immediate future, we're going to take a vote this week, for instance, on an appropriations bill, that I think is going to see us moving in the right direction. But we have a much longer way to go in terms of this, and we put together now a bipartisan group of members in the Science and National Labs Caucus. This moves well beyond just appropriators to try to build some support in the Congress, no matter what team you might think you're on, to have you think a little bit more about the country and to make sure that investments that aid us in medical research and scientific innovation, that these can be more considered on a nonpartisan basis. And I am very hopeful that that can happen.
Really? Front and back, really? Hang on a second. All right. Well, it's a follow-on to the.
It sounds like a second keynote almost.
Yeah, no, it's a follow-on. So, science and technology is all about disruptive approaches to problems, both new and old. I think you're well aware of that. But recently, the most disruptive thing about science and technology has been the chaos of the budget process. Science rarely makes progress on a timescale of months, but with things like sequestration, the government shutdown, yearly budget crises, it's hard for scientists and engineers to see how these things come together. So the question is, what can you do, what can we all do to bring stability to science and technology funding?
I think it was Warren Buffett who says, you should find someone who has done what you're trying to do and get the recipe and follow it, right? So, for instance, you see the European Union has set up a science and investment portfolio or fund that's got a 7-year duration to it. They put well over 70 billion euros. That's somewhere, depending on the fluctuation in currency, a $91 billion or so investment. They picked out 6 grand areas for investment in science and innovation. And they've made a commitment to fund it for 7 years. And in order to do this, they had to get 28 nations to agree unanimously. We should be able to get a majority of members of the United States Congress and the Senate and the administration together on what are the critical areas that we need to be investing in as a nation. I was at Oak Ridge, and we see the supercomputer there. Well, we know that our economic competitors in China are going to have the fastest computers unless we are willing to make the investments in order to stay out front, right? So the country, and shouldn't be a partisan issue. There shouldn't be a whole lot of confusion about whether we want to have the most powerful computers. This is the nation where computers were invented. And so we got to think about this in a way that puts the country's interests first. And I think we have to talk to the American people in a way in which we are not politicizing investment in innovation and in science. So I think that the outlook is possible mainly because of the competition. That is to say that we have, based on the last census, 317 million people. We're now competing with nations that have 1 billion plus populations, India and China. And I think competition is the best thing in the world. But it's clear that, on a per person basis, we are slightly outnumbered. And we have to decide that if where we can make the difference is in this 4% of our workforce that are scientists and engineers, they have to have the tools that position them to be able to invent new widgets and gadgets. Now, I think we got to tie to self-interest a little bit more as a nation. I've pushed legislation that I think we're going to have major progress on that would say that where we have federal investment in science and it leads to new products, that those new products, the licensing agreements, should tie those new products to the manufacturing being done here in the United States of America. Now, I think we should have some common sense policies like that, but we need to bring everybody to the table. So I think we can make progress, and I think the competition is going to drive us to do that and maybe we'll be able to push some of the partisan impulses to the side.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time at this point.
Thank you very much.